It's showtime. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome! It is I, your host, the Crusader, and this is the Design Gazette, the show where we like to talk about all things character design. Recently, we just had our first patch for Genshin Impact 6.0, otherwise known as our entry into Nod Krai. Now, at first, everyone thought this region was going to be a bit of a filler arc, a stopgap to stall the story until we got to Snezhnaya, but the more we saw, the more clear it became that this chapter of Teyvat has some serious spice. And that goes doubly so for the character designs. Personally, I don't think I've ever been this excited for a new cast in Genshin, with almost every character bringing something fresh and unique to the table. I think a big reason for this is that unlike previous regions with more straightforward stories, Nod Krai feels like a true crossroads, a place where multiple factions are all chasing their own interests. You've got the Fatui, the Wild Hunt, the Lightbearers, the Knights of Favonius, the Hexen Circle, the Frostmoon Scions, and a bunch of smaller groups, each with their own roots in different cultures and design styles. In the past, each region had a clear cultural theme that tied its characters together, like how Inazuma draws from Japanese motifs, Liyue from Chinese, Sumeru from Middle East, etc, etc. But Nod Krai doesn't follow that pattern. Sure, the region itself is inspired by Eastern European mythology, but there's no single cultural thread pulling everyone together. And while that means we lose that sort of familial bond the other regions had, it actually works in Nod Krai's favor. Everyone's in conflict here, and that visual contrast between characters just makes things so much more interesting. Plus, with no central arc or a clear villain, there's no pressure to spotlight one character above the rest, which gives the design team freedom to make every character stand out in their own unique way. Thanks to this break from Genshin's traditional structure, we get to see a cast that are all wildly different from each other, and in my opinion, much more interesting to break down. So without further ado, step right up and settle down, my dear audience, as today we're looking at the character designs of Nod Krai. Beginning in alphabetical order, first up we have Aino. From what we know, she's the designer behind Nefa and a member of the Clank Clank Crumb Cake craft shop. Try saying that 3 times over. This workshop was originally founded by an unnamed prodigy whose goal was to invent the world's best crumb cake machine, but over time it evolved into a renowned machine crafting shop thanks to the prodigy's amazing inventions. We can assume this prodigy is Aino, as the craft shop's insignia can be found all over her design. Blush is wearing an oversized lab coat, which definitely gives off mad scientist vibes. Speaking of mad scientist, a lot of her imagery actually reminds me of Victor Frankenstein. The lab coat, the sickly green secondary colors, the bolts, nuts and nails incorporated throughout the design, not to mention the fact that she literally built her own sentient robot. This sort of establishes her inspirations in gothic horror, which begins to make sense when you find out about her namesake. In real life, Aino Callis was a Finnish-Estonian author known for eerie gothic novellas, stories steeped in the supernatural, often exploring the darker aspects of human nature and the risks of delving into forbidden knowledge. And if you're still not sold on the horror connection, you can just take a look at her sleeves and be assured that is in fact a ghost, and she is a very scary character. But if you think that's all there is to it, you're very wrong, because Aino is also a name used in Japanese. The name is derived from the root word ai, which means love, and that explains why there's so many hearts in this girl's outfit, as well as the pink tertiary tones, as that's a color commonly tied to themes of affection and emotion. Usually, I'm not the biggest fan of lolly designs, but I must say that this one was very well thought out and genuinely fun to analyze. Next up is Alice, the long awaited founder of the Hexen Circle, and of course, Klee's mum. Unsurprisingly, she shares a ton of visual similarities with Klee. The red, white and black color scheme, crazy blonde hair, pointy ears, pyrovision, a Dodoko plushie, and a recurring 4-leaf flower motif. In Alice's case, her flower motif doesn't really resemble a 4-leaf clover, as it's much more closer to a Daphne flower. In the language of flowers, Daphne symbolize eternal love, immortality, and new beginnings, all qualities that feel far more in line with Alice's character than with Klee's. It's a subtle but elegant way to distinguish the mother from the daughter while still keeping them visually connected. That said, the real focal point of Alice's design has to be the hat, or whatever that thing on her head is. From a distance, it definitely reads as a witch hat silhouette, but the way it's been styled is pretty unique. Whether you love it or find it a bit strange, it absolutely draws your eye, and I've got to give the designers credit. It's whimsy and definitely a departure from Genshin's other witch-like characters. That said, I can't help but feel like they played it a little too safe with Alice's design. When you stack her up against the likes of Mona or Lisa, both of whom have distinct aesthetics, there isn't much in Alice's look that feels particularly ambitious or character-defining beyond the hat. Her outfit lacks that kind of flair or personal touch you'd expect from someone as eccentric and legendary as the founder of the Hexen Circle. Honestly, it feels more like a grown-up version of Klee wearing Amber's leggings than a fully fleshed-out character in her own right. For someone with Alice's larger-than-life reputation, I would have loved to see more quirky elements, magical accessories, or visual oddities that reflect her chaotic and whimsical nature outside of just a hat. Maybe it's because she's been such a long-anticipated character that the team decided to play it safe, which is understandable, but at the same time, compared to the already existing witch designs in the game, Alice feels surprisingly plain. It's not a bad design by any means, but it feels like a missed opportunity to really let her eccentricity shine. Now, onto a character we've seen quite a bit of, Columbina. The most immediate theme that comes to mind when looking at a design is that of divinity. Her pure white color palette and soft flowing fabrics create an almost ethereal angelic presence. Angels themselves have wings and are otherworldly, so a lack of shoes has always been a part of their design, which also carries over to her. Her headpiece is shaped like dove wings, a symbol that carries deep meaning in biblical mythology, often representing innocence, purity, and peace. Fittingly, her name Columbina literally translates to little dove. Also, the way the layers of her outfit lap over each other remind me of a seraph, a six-winged angel from Abrahamic traditions, with her headpiece also having 6 wings. Seraphim are often associated with light, purity, and burning passion, and are said to encircle the throne of God, singing hymns in an almost trance-like state. That kind of imagery aligns pretty well with how unsettling Columbina's own attitude is, with her humming and having this aloof but eerie presence whenever we see her in trailers. Another subtle but interesting detail is the cross pattern on her eye mask and headband. These are actually pretty similar to the design seen at the base of Seelie Quartz, and for those unfamiliar, Seelies in Genshin Impact are considered as devolved forms of angels scattered across the vat and often found near hidden treasures. All of this, the dove symbolism, angel-like silhouette, and the Seelie style patterns clearly point to one thing. Columbina's design is soaked in divine imagery, especially when it comes to angels. But this isn't the typical warm, glowing, and kind image of holiness you're used to. There's something eerie about her, an unsettling, almost otherworldly vibe that feels way more lunar and ethereal than warm sunshine, and that is exactly her role in the story. She's known as the Moon Maiden after all, and there's literally a moon symbol in the center of her design. It's like she's this quiet, haunting reflection of divinity. Beautiful, but just a little off in a way that makes you want to keep your distance. It's a really cool twist on the whole angelic aesthetic, and I can see why a lot of people are drawn to her design. Dialing down the angelic creep factor, next up is the absolutely adorable Duran. He's actually come a pretty long way, from mechanical dragon to chibi dinosaur to a real boy, and we can only hope he gets a much better ending than the original Duran. But while the original Duran is long gone, echoes of his lore and design still live on in this new human incarnation. The most notable element, of course, is the black horns, unmistakably draconic and undeniably cool. But there are also subtle nods to his origin, the skeletal wing motifs on his chest and cuffs, the tiny silver fangs on his sleeves, and even the texture of his waistcoat, which resembles the scaled underbelly of a dragon. His color palette is also very similar to Festering Desire, a weapon with deep ties to the original Duran, and the jewels on his outfit also closely resemble the crimson agates we collected in Dragonspine. However, at the heart of this design, quite literally, is the stone in the center of his chest. This is a direct callback to the original Duran, who despite being dead, still has a heart that beats in the center of Dragonspine, and that, more than anything, seems like the emotional anchor of his story, because while this new Duran may share the name and design elements of an evil dragon that came before him, his journey is clearly about forging his own identity, not being defined by the shadow of his predecessor. I'm a sucker for story-heavy designs, so in my book, Duran's design is pretty top-notch. Now, moving on to a character who's honestly stolen the show for a lot of people, Kirill Chudoromovich Flins. This man, my goodness, this man looks like he walked straight out of the Gothic Victorian era. That first shot of him as this lone figure wandering through the dark with a fog lantern, it's straight up detective fiction from the Gaslight era. The coat he's wearing with its heavy fabric, double-breasted front and ruby cut is the kind of thing you'd see on characters like Sherlock Holmes. But unlike Holmes, Flins isn't just about elegance. His design leans into rugged, practical 19th century workwear. The clasps, heavy leather, frayed edges, it all feels used. This is what he wears to survive long nights hunting monsters in the dark. The dark color palette itself adds even more to the Gothic atmosphere, reinforcing themes of mystery, death, and the supernatural. And then you get to the small things, the pale eyes, graying hair, and the coffin-shaped chains hanging at his sides. It all tells you one thing: this man walks hand in hand with death. Even his name is a reference to Flins, a god of death from Wendish mythology. That deity was said to live on a rocky peak, cloaked and carrying a torch. But in Flynn's case, the torch becomes a Gothic lightning lantern. Honestly, the more I talk about this guy, the more he reminds me of a hunter from Bloodborne. And for a lot of people, that comparison alone is enough to get them instantly hooked. I mean, it's been a long time since we've seen such a grounded, grim aesthetic in Genshin. Usually characters need to have some kind of flashy fantasy hook, or they have to conform to waifu husbando standards to feel like they fit in. But Flynn just shows up with this heavy metal, no-nonsense vibe that flies in the face of Genshin's usual design philosophy, and somehow, it works! And judging by the reactions online, he's already become one of the breakout favorites of Nod Krai. This is such an excellently designed character. Here's hoping Hoyoverse keeps taking bold swings like this, because characters like Flynn's prove just how refreshing it is to break the mold. And now onto a character who feels like she could have walked straight out of Zenless Zone Zero, Jahoda. She's cute, I guess. Again, I'm personally not into lolly or shoujo type characters, so a design already starts off with a personal disadvantage for me. Still, even setting aside my tastes, I can't really find much that stands out about her look. Sure, I get the intention behind the design. She's supposed to be a cat burglar. She's got the all-black outfit, cat-themed details like a hat and fur trim, and accessories that hint at a rebellious streak. The red bandana, graffiti on her hand, so on and so forth. On paper, these choices make sense, but beyond these basics, it feels like the designers weren't sure how to make Jahoda distinct from the rest of the cast. So I guess they just threw in the towel and leaned onto cheap shortcuts like the underboob and hip windows, basically relying on Skimp to sell a design, which is probably why it reminded me of Zenless Zone Zero. Again, it doesn't feel completely directionless thanks to the cat burglar stuff, but nothing about it really gives Jahoda her own identity. She ends up looking more like an emo version of Diona than a character with a unique presence. Maybe her personality will add more depth to the character, but from a purely visual standpoint, Jahoda definitely has the weakest design in Nod Krai. Phew, now let's look at a character that has both fan service and an actual direction behind the design. When I first saw Llama, I actually thought she was an HSR character, or more specifically a Vidyadra. She has the branching horns, elven ears, and even the water-based powers. This ain't done hung, this is done ho! Terrible jokes aside, once I actually started digging into her design inspirations, I found a lot of genuinely cool elements rooted in Eastern European and Baltic mythology. In those traditions, llamas were fairy like woodland spirits closely associated with childbirth, often helping mothers during labor or becoming fairy godparents to orphan children. They were seen as beautiful ethereal figures, sometimes even depicted nude with long flowing hair, which, to be fair, does make Genshin's skimpy design surprisingly mythologically accurate. Earlier folklore even described them as hybrids, half human, half animal beings, which lines up with what we see in the trailer, where Llama transforms into a half-deer form to traverse the landscape. That detail adds a great mythological touch, especially considering how deer are often portrayed in similar cultures as sacred guides, divine creatures that lead heroes towards new lands, spiritual insight, or their destiny. Deers also symbolize fertility, nature, ancestral ties, and cosmic links to celestial bodies like the sun, stars, and moon, and that moon connection in turn ties neatly into her role as a frost moon scion. Her design reinforces this with multiple lunar symbols, like the crescent shapes in her ornaments and the moon pattern fabric she wears. Even the leafy accessories are a callback to the woodland nature of Llama. It's a design that, once you unpack, reveals a lot of thought, symbolism, and cultural layering, all while being visually distinct and well constructed. Could I be biased because she looks like a character from Star Rail? Maybe. But even so, I think there's enough mythological depth and thematic cohesion here to confidently say, this is a good design. If it looks like a Sumeru character, sounds like a Sumeru character, and shares the same mythological inspirations as other Sumeru characters, I'm just gonna say it, Nefer is definitely from Sumeru. I mean, where do I even start? Her design is full of recurring triangular motifs, and if you didn't know, Egypt happens to be pretty famous for these little triangle-shaped structures called the Pyramids of Giza. Beyond that, she's covered in gold accessories on her head, shoulders, arms, and torso, which tracks with how ancient Egyptian royalty wore gold. In Egyptian culture, gold was considered the flesh of the gods, a symbol of eternity and divine power because it doesn't tarnish. Then there's the curved eye marking extending from her right eye, which a lot of people might confuse for the Eye of Horus. But fun fact, the Eye of Horus is actually the left eye. Nefer's marking is on the right, which ties it to the Eye of Ra. Ra was seen as the creator of the universe and the source of all life and light. The Eye of Ra represents raw divine power, both protective and destructive, and was often personified as a fierce goddess who acted as a defender and enforcer. The name Nefer itself holds some weight as it's an ancient Egyptian word and hieroglyph with meanings tied to beauty, goodness, and completeness. It was a big deal in Egyptian culture, showing up in the names of iconic historical figures like Nefertiti, Nefertari, and Neferhotep. So there's no doubt that the design is deeply rooted in Egyptian influence, both visually and thematically. That said, while the cultural foundation is strong, I can't say there's much here that really makes her stand out from a character design perspective, as there are already many characters that beat her at what she does. Yelan outshines her in the femme fatale department, Candace already nailed the Egyptian warrior vibe, and if we're talking aesthetic claws, Rosaria beats her hands down, or claws down. So Nefer ends up feeling like a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none. Don't get me wrong, it's a solid design, clean, well researched, and visually appealing, but unless her role in the story turns out to be particularly significant or surprising, I don't expect her to leave a lasting impression on the general player base. Nicole is one of those characters I don't have a ton to say about, mostly because the shots we've seen of her so far are either wide landscape frames or extreme close-ups, so it's tough to get a clear read on her full design. But from what little we can see, there are a few interesting elements worth unpacking. To start with, her name Nicole is the feminine form of Nicholas, a combination of Nike meaning victory and Laos meaning people, overall meaning victory for the people. And that alone feels pretty intentional, especially considering her role in the story so far. She's described as someone who guides those in need, earning her the title The Guide Who Will Never Get Lost from the other members of the Hexen Circle. That title, paired with her name's meaning, makes her feel like a protector or spiritual navigator for those who are lost. Related to that, she also has some very distinct angelic features. During her appearance in the trailer, we see her manifest wings, lighting up a golden halo, which reinforces the guiding, almost divine presence she carries. Now, her full name, Nicole Ryan, might also be a reference to Nicole Ryan Lepeltier, a historical French astronomer and a human computer who made significant contributions to science despite the major barriers facing women in her era. She even has an asteroid and lunar crater named after her, which in the context of a story that heavily revolves around the moon, definitely doesn't feel like a coincidence. Her beret adds a subtle French touch, and the whole vibe from her name to her symbolism gives off a very different energy compared to most of the cast. There's something more reserved and cerebral about her, like she's tied more to knowledge, observation and quiet strength than flashy combat or eccentric flair. And honestly, that makes her all the more intriguing. Again, we haven't seen her full design yet, but based on what we do know, Nicole feels like a character with a lot of potential depth. I'm really curious to see how they handle her, especially given her role as one of the witches of the Hexen Circle. Sandrone is easily one of the most intriguing designs we've seen in Genshin. To be fair, that's kind of expected when it comes to the Fatui Harbingers, though I'm really hoping she doesn't meet the same fate as Capitano or Signora. Like the other Fatui Harbingers, Sandrone's name and title comes from Commedia dell'arte, a form of Italian theatre known for its masked characters and exaggerated social archetypes. In that setting, Sandrone was a sharp, sly peasant who often acted as the voice of the common folk. Of course, this doesn't tell us much about what to expect from a character, since the Harbingers don't exactly stick to the traits of their theatrical namesakes. If they did, Capitano would have been a loud, pretentious show-off, Alicino would have been pure comedic relief, and Tartaglia would have been an older man with a stutter. What makes Sandrone stand out though is that her archetype gained more popularity in the puppet version of Commedia dell'arte. This little detail lines up perfectly with her in-game identity as the marionette of the Fatui. This is where Sandrone's design really gets interesting. From a distance, it looks like a huge, intimidating puppeteer carrying around this tiny little porcelain doll in his hand, but when you know the lore, it flips on its head. The giant has Ruin Guard parts built into his design and is the one being controlled, while the little girl is actually the one in charge, even though she presents herself as just a doll. Her outfit sells that idea too. It takes cues from 19th century Victorian dolls, lace bonnets, big ribbons, frilly dresses, all the fancy stuff that played into the old-fashioned fantasy of elegance and aristocracy. She even has a wind-up gear on her back, which makes the whole innocent doll being carried around illusion even more stronger. But in reality, she's the puppeteer, and that twist creates this unsettling vibe. She looks sweet and delicate, but her actual personality is manipulative and sinister, and that dichotomy is what makes a design so interesting. It's a design that's pretty, but ultimately creepy. Finally, we get to Varka, probably the most anticipated character in Nod Krai, and honestly, he looks like a mix between Aventurine and Japal from Star Rail. So yeah, I like him already. I mean, I'm a sucker for characters with that rowdy big brother energy, and judging by how many people in Mondstadt look up to him, he definitely fills that role. He's the Grand Master of the Knights of Favonius, welcome Eula into the Order, redeem Rosaria, mentor Razor, and on top of all that is described as a cheerful wild dude. He's also known as the Knight of Boreas, and Boreas of course is the ancient wolf spirit who protects Mondstadt. Even his name Varka likely comes from the old Persian word for wolf, and in the fact that his sword is the wolf's gravestone and has silver fur on his back, and you can see how deep the wolf symbolism runs in his character. That said, his final look isn't exactly what a lot of people expected. Personally, I thought his color scheme would lean closer to Wolf's Gravestone's darker tones, but since he's both Mondstadt's representative and an animo character, the green color palette does make sense. The other big talking point in the community, however, has been his age. Some people expected him to look older given his lore and reputation, but knowing Hoyoverse's track record, it's not all that surprising. I mean, I don't think the engine can handle more than 4 models, and they just don't like making older characters in general. Honestly, Zhongli is the oldest looking playable character in Genshin, and even then he only looks 30. So while some fans were hoping Varka would break that trend, Hoyoverse played it safe again and went with another Bishonen style design. It's a bit of a missed opportunity again, sure, but at least he's not stuck with a Shota body type, so we can be grateful for that much. And that is everyone we've seen teased for Nod Krai so far. Honestly, I think it's a pretty strong lineup, maybe even one of the most interesting casts we've gotten in this game. Sure, I might be a little biased because some of the designs lean into the gothic horror vibe I love, but I think the region's biggest strength is how it pulls from so many different inspirations. In other regions, characters are tied pretty tightly to one single cultural theme, which can feel a bit restrictive. Nod Krai, on the other hand, doesn't really have that same restriction, as it's a crossroads. The characters feel free to draw from all kinds of visual motifs, and that's what makes the cast way more diverse and exciting to explore. I mean, if Gothic isn't your thing, maybe you'll connect with the mystical Eastern European inspired design. If the Egyptian influences don't grab you, maybe the angelic Western motifs will. Basically, you're never stuck with one single style here. That's why this lineup feels so exciting. It promises a region where every encounter offers something unexpected, where every character feels distinct yet part of a larger moving story. Hopefully, I hope Genshin can stick the landing for Nod Krai. And that is a wrap on this episode of the Design Gazette. If you enjoyed our time together, be sure to help me out by sharing, liking, and commenting down below on some of your favorite things about these new Genshin designs. Links in the description if you want to buy me a coffee, and if you're new around here, hi, I'm the starward Crusader, and I have a whole series of Design Gazettes and story recaps waiting for you to enjoy by hitting that big red subscribe button. A special shout out to Lilith Snow for supporting this show. You're the best. Yeah, so I might be getting back into Genshin Impact if you didn't notice by the title of this video. Yeah, I don't think I've been this excited for Genshin since Fontaine, maybe. Yeah, no, it's been a while since I've been excited for Genshin. Again, I'm hoping, because for me, Genshin has always been a game that just feels like there's missed potential all the time. The game promises me these grand, luxurious visions, and then they get halfway through to it and then never follow through. There's a lot of things they leave on the table that they can do so much more with, and that has always been my biggest disappointment with Genshin. So hopefully Nod Krai can live up to its full potential, and I'm excited to just be taken along for the ride. And with all that said, may your journey lead you ever starward.